Hello and welcome to your Fairy God Mentor. This is the show that inspires, encourages, educates, and supports expectant couples who desire to confidently navigate pregnancy, birth, and finding balance in an unbalanced world. I am Angie Taylor, the mother of 9 with 2 degrees in natural health. I'm also a birth insider, knowing the ins and outs of the birth industry and all of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've worked with expectant couples since 2003 in a variety of roles, including birth educator, birth doula, home birth midwife, breastfeeding support, and life coaching. Sit back and enjoy hearing about all the things you never knew you never knew. Today I interview Ann Kaplan, who is a mother of 4 children and a parent coach based in Denver, Colorado. She has lived the dream and difficulty of parenting through every childhood stage from infancy through adolescence. She understands not only the joys, but the difficulties and worries that come as a parent. Ann has a unique, holistic approach to parent work that includes emotional support, home management skills, and effective discipline that empowers children while improving behavior. She coaches women through various stages of motherhood, from conception to the transition into their new motherhood role, to behavioral challenges, to starting a business with kids in tow. Ann is someone who will give it to you straight and love you fiercely. Welcome to my podcast, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Parenting, like
what a big Pandora's box.
right.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Angie, so thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I'm just so glad to have you here. I know every parent is looking for the parenting book for their child, and I have 9 kids, and so I have tried to lovingly explain to them there's no such thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually your child gives you the volume that pertains to them.
That's
so it's
totally
gonna
true.
it's gonna unfold over time. It feels kind of like a letdown, but that's the truth. And as part of what my podcast is about, I want to get to those hard-hitting truths. There really is no parenting book that's going to give you the answers to everything that every child is going to do, or how they're going to act or respond.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I literally just had a conversation with a client about a few weeks ago where I was like, everyone complains that we don't get, like, kids don't come with a manual, but I actually believe they do. It's just that each kid is their own manual. The reason why there's no manual is because we don't need one as parents. Like, if you really tune into your child will show you and teach you and tell you exactly what they need. The child is the manual. So I just think that's like so serendipitous that you basically just said the exact thing that I had said myself just a few weeks ago to a dad.
Right. Well, and I think the frustration comes from, we just want the manual. We want to just be able to flip through the page. Okay, where's the troubleshooting page? I'm having this trouble. How do I fix it? And you don't get that with human beings, especially with your children.
Mm-hmm.
And, as they grow and get older and you become more experienced as a parent and you evolve, you become the parent that child needs.
Absolutely, 100%. And it doesn't matter how many kids you have, you will share your gifts in the way that fits each child uniquely. It just happens.
Right.
And I
right.
think so it can be disappointing for people to think like, oh, but I just want to know what the right answer is. I want to know what that manual would say or whatever. But at least with the work that I do with my clients, I really work on kind of elevating their energy around that concept so that it's actually a relief, because it becomes a trust fall to know that your child has all the answers within them. That's kind of like one of the principles we learn and we get trained as coaches, is that our clients have all the answers already. It's not our job to tell them what to do. It's our job to help them uncover their answers. And that is totally true with children as well. So for me, it feels like a big weight is lifted off of me. Like being a good parent doesn't have to mean knowing what the solution is. Helping my child doesn't mean having the answers at all. And I can go into every new situation totally blind, but still totally confident.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's not a one size fits all for every situation for each child, because you could have two different children make the same choice, have similar consequences, but your parenting with them may need to be different to help get them through that. So, I think that how many parenting styles are there? I mean, it feels like there's a bazillion, but I don't think that there are a bazillion.
Well, if you ascribe to the classic psychology, there are 4 styles of parenting. Authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and what was the third one? Oh, neglectful. So, but all parenting modalities that are taught are theoretically trying to teach us to be authoritative parents. It's up to us to decide what actually aligns with our values and personality and goals and beliefs and things like that. So you might ascribe to conscious parenting or love and logic or the visible child or whatever. Like you said, there's a million out there. All of them fall into, at least in theory, fall into that authoritative quadrant, which is like a high level of connection with your child and a high level of leadership with your child. But when we actually implement those styles, we may or may not be able to effectively get where we want to go with different modalities, because we're not maybe taking into consideration, like, who are we? What is our personality? If you're like a big, aggressive, bulldozery type of person, which is my personality and I wear it proudly, some of those other techniques of the visible child, for example, or conscious parenting are going to be challenging to implement, not because they're wrong or bad, but because they just really don't fit me, who I am. And I will ineffectively implement them with my children. And then I will not be actually in that authoritative quadrant because I'm really not walking the talk of that particular modality. So it's important for me to honor myself in my parenting as much as it is to honor my child.
And I have to say, I love the fact that you use the words effective and ineffective. My mom, who was a single mom to 6 daughters for 13 years before she married her sweetheart, she taught us that there's no such thing as a good parent or a bad parent. You're either an effective parent or you're an ineffective parent. And the fact is that we are all both at one time or another. And we have to give ourselves grace and we have to forgive ourselves. And part of that is acknowledging to the child, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I handled this situation poorly. Can we start over?
Absolutely. An email out about a month ago to my list that was about like giving ourselves a do-over. And it was fascinating how many parents saw the image that literally was a quote that you could say to your child of like, I didn't like the way I talked to you just now. Can I have a do-over? It was clearly a do-over for the parent. And almost everybody who engaged with that post misread it and assumed that it was giving your child a do-over, which is great. It's great to give our kids a do-over. But it was fascinating to me to see how many parents didn't even open, their minds were so close to the possibility that they were allowed to be fallible, that even in a blatant message that's about our fallibility, they still couldn't let it in. And it actually inspired me to make a whole second message to my audience of like, we are allowed to mess up. We're supposed to mess up. Like, we're sitting here teaching our kids, or supposedly teaching our kids, like, mistakes are normal. This is how you grow. You're supposed to mess up. Watch me be perfect. Well, that's nonsense, and it doesn't work, and it's not even attainable. So it's okay to say to yourself and to your child, like, whoops.
Right. Well, I know, oh gosh, last year we had one of our kids yell at us, like full on, just get within inches and just yell and scream at us and just speak the words he needed to speak and say what he needed to say. And it was very rude. It was very disrespectful. And my husband and I went into our bedroom and to just take a moment. And, my husband's ranting. That was very disrespectful. That was, what are we going to do? We can't just let that stand. And I'm like, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that he feels safe to speak to us that way. So it matters what we do next.
Right.
Because all of the kids are watching. This isn't just about him and what he did and how he said it. This is about letting all of the kids know how mom and dad respond to this, because we don't need them to be afraid of us.
Right.
That's when kids get in trouble, right? That's when kids head for the gangs. That's when kids head for the places we don't want them to be, is when they feel like they cannot have an open, honest conversation with mom and dad. And so that was very eye-opening for my husband to kind of sit back, and he's like, okay, so how are we going to handle this? So we did point out to our son that while the way that you said what you said was disrespectful, and he immediately apologized. Yes, it was. But you weren't listening to me. You weren't hearing what I was trying to say. But we were able then to have a conversation and to get it all out. And that's ultimately the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think we get to decide how we engage with whatever ways our children are showing up in the world. Like, that's the difference between reacting and responding. So it's absolutely, almost certainly going to happen to every parent that their child treats them disrespectfully at times, loses their temper, is dysregulated. And also that's probably going to happen in the reverse too. There's going to be times where we as parents are dysregulated. We are not responding, we are reacting, and we wind up treating our children disrespectfully and maybe aggressively and things like that. So those things happen. But when we believe that it's a foregone conclusion and we have to rise to that level, we have to meet the occasion with like meets like, that's when you wind up having conflict in your family. When you can decide, like you did, to take some time, re-regulate yourself, be conscious and intentional about how you engage with that outburst can be something that you receive with love and understanding. Not necessarily that you're not going to have any boundaries about how you are treated and what you're going to do about that disrespect, but it doesn't need to be something that you're meeting with that same escalated energy, to say, I really want to have a conversation with you about this. Seems like you're really upset right now. I'm happy to talk to you about it when you've calmed down. Or with little kids, we say, I'm happy to talk to you when your voice is as calm as mine, or whatever. Then you can engage with the content of what they're saying and not in the manner in which they're saying it.
Yeah. Well, and then I think that we're also all still learning how to deal with the way that we were parented.
100%.
And understanding that's one of those elephants in the room. We know how we were parented. We know what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it. And we have committed to ourselves to never parent our child that way. But it happens, you see the posts on Facebook. I said, I promised myself I would never be my mother until I saw her finger.
At the end of my hand, wagging at my kid. Absolutely. I actually did a workshop just last month that was called Revolutionary Parenting. And it was just about what you're describing, this like breaking through generational cycles and really taking ownership. And we get to decide. Our past does not have to define us as parents, and we get to create our future and be proactive about that and recognize and honor the fact that that is work. It requires healing. It requires recognition. What are our patterns and where did they come from, and what healing needs to happen so we can release that pattern? And it's not a conscious choice when you see your mother's finger wagging at the end of your hand. That's something that happened from a deep ingrained worldview, belief system, experience, habits, all of those things that are totally changeable, but they're not changeable from this like top down approach. Like we think, oh, I'll just decide not to do that anymore. That top down approach doesn't work. We usually need a bottom up approach, which is about connecting with your gut, your intuition, your heart, all of those kind of deeper sources of wisdom that are far wiser than our silly little brains. And there was another thing I wanted to kind of call back to that you had brought up, Angie, just because we have this moment right now, is that belief, and I think a lot of us have it, that there's a way to parent that will prevent our kids from being in a gang someday or making these bad choices and going in the directions we don't want them to. And I think that thought process is totally understandable for so many of us. Well, first of all, we just want to know that there's something we can do to make sure that our kids will be safe. And it feels like an insurance policy. If I just figure out the right way to parent, nothing terrible that I see happening to other kids will happen to my kid. And that feels really relieving, because the opposite of that, which is unfortunately true, is that there's a whole lot that's totally out of our control. So I just want to say, for anyone who's listening to this, if your child is quote unquote going astray or getting into a place that feels like it's where you didn't want them to go, it's not a foregone conclusion that it's because you did something wrong that that's happening. And what's much more helpful for kids in that place is for us to just meet them where they're at and see ourselves as their Sherpa, basically walking alongside them while they go through this hard time and find their way to their next iteration of themselves. Then that's something that's pretty personal to me. My eldest son right now lives in a residential treatment center. And that's despite the fact that I am a parenting expert, and I can tell you without any defensiveness at all that I am an amazing mother. But Elijah has his own mental illness. He has his own journey with his own kind of inner core wounds and things like that, that he just needs to do this right now. And it would be really, really counterproductive for him if I were to spend the whole time that he's doing this work telling myself that I broke him, because the most important thing for him to do is to engage in this work, recognizing that it's his journey and he needs to do this for himself. And the more that I take ownership of it, the less ownership he takes, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm glad that you brought us back to that, because that was another conversation, another elephant in the room that needs to be talked about, is that, I see so many parents that are just so worried. My kid is old enough to move out on their own. Did I do everything? Did I teach them everything? Well, the fact of the matter is there's no way for us to teach them everything.
Mm-hmm.
There really isn't.
We can't teach to think that an 18-year-old would have a fully matured adult wisdom. There's no way that your kid's going to be fully baked by the time they're 18. They're meant to go out in the world half baked.
Right. Just like we did.
Mm-hmm.
Really? We're designed to make choices, and all choices come with consequences. Some are good, some are bad. And by bad, I mean, they're not ones that you really want to have to deal with, not meaning that you're a bad person because you made that choice. But understanding that our kids, despite the choices that they make, need to know that mom and dad's door is always open, and need to know that mom and dad are always a safe place, that mom and dad don't have all the answers, but are there to help guide us on our journey. Our oldest daughter, when she was 17, was pregnant. And so we had all sorts of conversations around that. And, church members telling me, you have to make her understand, she has to give her baby up. And I'm just like, wrong. It is not my job to make her do anything. It is not my job to make her see anything. It is my job to answer her questions, to guide her through what is happening, and to just be there with her, to mentor her, to know that she's loved anyway. She's learning a lesson, And her viewpoint of that lesson depends on how everyone around her treats her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it's very important. And not to say we walked on eggshells and we tippy-toed around things, but we had some really hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got her in contact with a friend of mine who had the exact same experience and who chose to keep her child. And I said, I haven't been there, so we can't go from my experience, but let's find you people who have been there so that you can talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And give you people that you can ask questions of that can answer those questions for you and will answer them honestly. And that
Yep.
helped her the most.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all that we can do once they're out in the world, and even as they're growing up inside our own homes. It's really about building that, in my viewpoint, building that relationship of knowing
Mm-hmm.
I am safe here, regardless of the choices that I make.
100%. Mm-hmm. I
You know,
agree.
my parents aren't perfect. I'm not going to blame them when I make certain choices. But that's one thing that, you know, my generation was taught, and they still do this in some talk therapy. You know, well, if you're having problems, then it was your mother's fault, or it was your father's fault, or, you know, and it's time for us to take responsibility for the choices that we're making. The consequences that we are living through are ours. And while it may come from imperfect, you know, being raised imperfectly and having a skewed view of the world, those consequences are still ours. So to I don't know, to keep blaming the previous generation, I think that's another elephant in the room that needs to be taken care of. You know,
Well, I
teaching
think
kids.
that's kind of the real power of working with a coach, is to it's not an either or thing. You know, the past did happen and there's nothing we can
Mhm.
do. I actually was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, but you know, I think a lot of us come to parenting with some idea that we're going to, you know, we're going to create the childhood that we never had for our kids. We're going to really give our kids what we deserved and what we believe they deserve and what all children deserve. And even if we're 100% successful in doing that, there's almost like this magical thinking that makes us believe like, and if I do that, then I'll be okay. But that's not really true. And the reason why is, well, first of all, that one of those elephants we've already discussed, which is some of this is just out of our hands. But the other reason is like, there's nothing that we can do as parents that makes our childhood not what it was. So it is true at the same time. Our childhood was what it was. It impacted us the way it did. The things that happened actually happened. And it's not a choice that we make to say, well, that's nobody's fault, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'm in charge of my own choices, and so I'm just gonna put all that stuff under the rug. Or the other choice, which is to say, this is all somebody else's fault. Everybody else did this to me, and so I'm helpless. I'm stuck in this place that I've gotten to because of what has happened to me. It's not like an either or choice. What coaching does is help you get to a place where you acknowledge and honor your past, you acknowledge and honor your needs, and you release blame so that you can say, and I can fully say from my own experience, like my mother did some stuff when I was a kid that was absolutely not okay. She is a rageaholic. She still is a rageaholic. She loves to scream and yell. And that was basically the most common emotions that were expressed in my family were anger or disappointment. And that did impact me very, very deeply. And it's taken me until middle age to get to a place where I'm 100% ready to just release that and actually have a good relationship with my mother and accept her and all of those things. And that wasn't possible for me to do simply by saying, okay, well, forget that. I'm just not going to do that. And I'm the boss of my life. That's a top-down approach, like we were talking about before, and
Mhm.
it doesn't work. it had to be that kind of marriage of those two aspects of accepting and acknowledging and taking a really close look at what happened to me, and understanding like, oh, well, no wonder I feel this way, and no wonder I struggle with this and this. That makes perfect sense, understanding my past. But I'm ready to let it go and release the anger and blame about it and move into, once again, a higher energy level about it, to say, now what do I want to do about it? And so that kind of like alchemy of those two, the backward gaze and the forward focus, all at once.
So would you say that that's a big obstacle for your clients, is looking back and acknowledging that, this is who my parent was, and I know that this is not who I want to be, and I know how it impacted me? Because I'll be honest with you, I found out after my mother died why she and I did not really have a close relationship. That she blamed me for the near drowning of my little sister. Well, I had nothing to do with it, but she withdrew from me emotionally. And so I felt the most complete when I was in my room by myself and not out with the family.
Right.
And so, but once I realized that, I went, oh my gosh, there are so many different directions that I could have gone in that situation.
Right.
But instead, for me, I started writing in a journal, and all of the entries started with Dear Heavenly Father. And so that became my therapy.
Right.
And growing up, I didn't realize what I was doing. It was just, I had a need. My dad wasn't there. My mother had withdrawn emotionally from me. And I find pleasure by myself just singing along with the radio and writing in a journal.
Oh my gosh.
Those were my therapy years. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
But
There's
so many directions you could go with a story like that. Like, for example, there could be 100 kids who are in the exact same position you were in, and they will go 100 different directions with that. And so that there's a whole like nature nurture conversation there that is fascinating. That's a whole rabbit hole we could go down for sure. But then also, just in your personal experience, like, you understanding like how much that spiritual connection was really important for you, and how you intuitively just knew how to take care of your needs. And I want to say that every single human comes earthside equipped with the intuitive knowledge of how to take care of our needs. Absolutely. And when I meet with a client, the person that I see today is a product of all of those amazingly incredible, wise, survival and solution-based tactics that this person created when they were probably a toddler to navigate the world. And as we become adults, we get to decide, okay, that was a really great childish tactic that I had that really helped me grow and move past the experiences that I had in my childhood. Is it serving me now? And so in your case, I mean, obviously having a spiritual relationship with a higher power is something that can be really beneficial through your entire life. It's not a childish tactic necessarily, but there might be aspects of it that you decide, actually, now I'm a more mature and nuanced person. I can apply this spiritual relationship I have in more subtle ways. I don't need to withdraw from people to feel safe. I don't need to be all alone, for example. I can be in relationships that are challenging and uncomfortable for me and not feel unsafe the way that I did when I was a kid. And so all of those things, that is a part for sure of growing into the parent you want to become, is growing into the person you want to become and recognizing some of the things. Like, every single person has a childish survival tactic. That's just how brains work. We all do. Whether you experience like extreme trauma when you were a kid, whether you didn't really have anything that you would consider to be officially like by the book trauma, it doesn't matter. The experience of childhood is traumatic. Being a child is a series of micro traumas because our brains haven't evolved to make sense of this very confusing and harsh world. So it could just be even a disappointed look on your mother's face, or not getting what you wanted at the county fair, or whatever, things that are confusing and upsetting to a child affect us. And we apply our unique, amazing gifts in those moments as children to navigate those challenges and make them make sense. And at some point, usually between ages of like 35 to 45, we have a little bit of an existential crisis of like, I don't want to act like this anymore. I'm not 5 anymore.
Right.
What can I do instead? And I can see how acting this way is not getting me where I want to go, especially with my kids.
Right.
It's time for us to not use our childish behaviors anymore and allow space for our kids to, yes, use their childish behaviors and not see that as something that's bad or wrong or a reflection on us poorly.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Your child right now, whoever's listening to this, your child right now is experiencing micro traumas all day long.
Yes.
That's just the way the universe is designed.
Right. Right. Well, and then when you look at trauma-informed care and you understand that all of us have some form of trauma, that even includes your child. So we all need to be the person that will sit still and just be quiet with them when that's all that they want. Mm-hmm. I hear moms saying, well, how do I get my 2-year-old to just go off and play? They just want to be in my lap all day. And I'm like, well, let's look at your day. What has your day been like? And they'll tell me all of these different things that they've done. And I said, children are 100% intuitive until they're like, somewhere between 5 and 8 years old. And if you're feeling frustrated and stressed, guess what? They know that mom needs to sit down and relax. So guess what they're going to do? They're going to want to be on your lap. Isn't it such amazing wisdom that your child knows how to get you to sit still and just be for just a moment? And we just don't think about that.
I agree. I can also see, like, we've had this kind of conversation of like various elephants in the room of, blaming ourselves and our childhoods and things like that when we bring to the table with parenting. And I can imagine someone listening to this conversation right now, and almost like another elephant that's kind of developing in the room is like, yeah, but how do I still need to set boundaries and enforce boundaries and give consequences and discipline my child? And I would hate for anyone listening to this conversation to be getting the impression that it's all about just like getting to some Zen place where you like float 3 inches off the ground all the rest of your life and nothing, is water off a duck's back. That's a really, really great skill to develop. And it is important. Our emotional wellness is probably paramount, the number one thing that we need to do in effective parenting. And there are parenting skills that we can develop. There are ways to improve our children's behavior, hold boundaries with them, give them loving consequences. That is a massively important part. Like when we go back to that those 4 different styles of parenting, authoritative is the one that everybody will tell you is correct, right? And that means a high level of not only emotional intelligence and connection with your child, but a high level of leadership and control in your family. So I think up until now, we've kind of been talking a lot about that emotional intelligence and connection aspect, but there's that whole other axis that, or at least in the visual I use with clients, it is the x-axis and the horizontal axis on that, visual aid that is control and leadership. And that is also something that we need to honor. And it's a tricky thing. I mean, this is why most of us quote unquote fail at being authoritative all the time, because it is hard to maintain both a high level of control and a high level of emotional connection simultaneously. That is a challenge, and it is a very doable challenge. It is a surmountable challenge, but most people don't just organically parent that way, because most of us weren't organically parented that way ourselves. And so there's some missing elements that we can give ourselves now. And that's the beauty, and I think luck that we have of living in this time when there are resources like this podcast, like my coaching program, like books out there that are amazing, all of those things that weren't really accessible to most people a generation ago. Now
Right.
we get to take a really clear look at ourselves and say, okay, so I'm really good at these things. These are areas that I really need to improve in. And it's okay that I don't know how to, because there are people and resources out there that will teach me that.
Right. Right. Well, and it's when we're talking control, it's not necessarily the snap your fingers and they do what you've told them to do. It's the rapport that you have with them. It's that connection that you've built with them from birth. It's the way that you phrase things. It's the boundaries you've put in place that let them know that they're safe, and all of that. So I know that you've got a course coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Is this some of the stuff that you go over in your course?
Yeah, so I always have a course. So I run a group coaching program, and it's open all the time. People can join, and once you're in it forever. It's not there's no expiration date on it. So and yes, that is what I teach. So all of my clients, is part of being in my coaching program, do a course. It's a self-paced course that teaches elements in all of those different areas. The elements of healing ourselves, the elements of creating emotional connection with our kids, and the elements of setting and enforcing boundaries with our kids. And so throughout that whole time, you do a workbook, and it has all the exercises in all those kind of 3 areas. And then also there's like video tutorials that go with all of that stuff. But I learned a long time ago that it's not enough to just kind of plop a bunch of information onto somebody. You need support and accountability, and especially that emotional healing piece. It's really helpful to have support and kind of like a loving and reflective mirror to hold up to you and say, I noticed that you said you wanted to do this, but then I see that you're doing that. What do you think's going on there? Or, I know that you're trying so hard to shift your mindset around the fact that your child always leaves their backpack on the floor in front of the door when they come home. Classic example. What is a different way to think about this, and how would you act and feel if you felt that way, and et cetera, et cetera. That's where coaching comes in. It's not just about figure this out, here's some more books. Most of the clients who hire me have already read many parenting books, and like I said before, it's not that any of those modalities are wrong. It's just that a book can't really teach you how to understand and honor yourself, and to know you, and create not a one size fits all approach to your parenting, but a customized approach that honors both your child and your unique needs, and all of that stuff that requires personal connection. And it's a lifelong journey, which is why I don't have an expiration. It's not like a 6-month program or something like that. It's, you hire me when your kid's a toddler, and we'll still be chatting when they're a teenager and bring their boyfriend home or whatever it is. So, yeah, 100%. It's so multifaceted, and it's a journey.
Amazing. Well, I will say, I wish I had your program when I first started.
Well, I do too. I mean, that's kind of when I sat down to say, like, okay, I've done one-on-one coaching my entire career. And then when it was time for me to create like this next sort of brainchild that was for my clients and would serve them even better than one-on-one coaching, I literally sat down and said, well, what do I wish I had 17 years ago when my oldest was born? And one of the things that I wanted so badly was to not feel alone, and to have a community where it was safe for me to be a hot mess, and most of the time realize, like, oh, everybody else is dealing with this too. I guess I'm not as much of a hot mess as I thought. And to get encouragement and find people that believed in me. And so that's something that the community of this program offers to parents. And for many of them, it's the only place that they have that. And that's something you just can't get from private one-on-one coaching. Your coach can tell you until she's blue in the face, like, you're normal. Everybody says that, but it's different to be on a coaching call and hear one of your peers ask the question that you had written down to ask yourself, and be like, oh my gosh, we really are all the same. This is amazing.
Right. Right. Or someone asks the question that you feel is just a stupid question. I shouldn't ask that question. But then
Right.
someone
You're
else
aware
asks the same question. You're like,
it.
I'm not stupid.
I guess I'm
Somebody else
not
had the same
stupid.
question.
Right. Or someone asks a question and you're like, oh yeah, really good. I hadn't even thought of that. I can't wait to
Uh-huh.
hear the answers to this. And to really just, yeah, learn from each other. And there's a concept in like energy work and emotional work called entrainment, which is that when we're in a room or a community full of people, literally in a room or in a Zoom room, it doesn't matter, but when you're sharing space with many people, it's common for that group of people to sort of congeal around the same sort of like energy level or attitude or mindset or mood or whatever word you want to say. And that is something that you could use, sort of to your detriment or to your advantage. So if you surround yourself with people who are defeatist and stuck and, negative and looking for all the problems in the world, your mind, you will entrain to them and you will become and find yourself in that headspace just the same. And if you are in a room surrounded by people who believe in you, who know that you've got this, who are solution minded, who believe that you have all of the answers you need within yourself, that is exactly what you will entrain to. And that entrainment piece is something that is impossible to create without a group setting, without a community. And it's fundamental to human experience. We are social creatures. We need entrainment. And when we're all alone and isolated, we have no one to entrain to but our own inner demons. And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have to find our tribe.
100%.
Yes. So what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Mm-hmm. So most people like connecting with me through using my free workbook that I offer. And if you decide to get it, you'll be in my world in many different ways. So it's a free workbook called Getting Kids to Listen the First Time. And it is literally a step-by-step guide. You could get it today, use it today, see results with your kids today. And the beauty of that workbook is it solves a really common problem like right away, but it also teaches you a lot of concepts about parenting that apply to tons of challenges, not just getting your kids to listen. And you can find that super easily because I made a bit.ly link for it. So you can find that at bit.ly/kids-who-listen. And that's the best way to get help from me right away, get connected with me right away, and kind of just be in my universe right away.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Ann, so much for being here with me. I really appreciate everything that we talked about, all those elephants in the room and the hard conversations and, the realizations that we have to take on our own as a parent, first that I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes and it's okay that I'm going to make mistakes.
Right. 100%.
So
I'm not
important.
perfect and that's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, thanks again for being here on this episode. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Angie. I appreciated being here.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. To learn more about me, your fairy god mentor, simply go to angietaylorfairygodmentor.com.